right, welcome back. We are going to get rolling with our next presenter. It's the fearless leader from Farming Smarter, our executive director, Ken Coles. He's going to look at current research at Farming Smarter and some producer fields who have already adopted precision agriculture vacuum planters to seed pulse crops.
Hello, I'm Ken Coles, Executive Director of Farming Smarter. I'd like to welcome you to our virtual field school. We didn't know, given the current COVID situations, whether we'd be allowed to have people in the field. It seems that restrictions are being lifted, but our next tour will be in the field. But I hope you enjoy our attempt at a virtual field school, and we're going to show you some plots and nice close-ups. So thanks to Morton here videotaping everything. Today is actually June 11th, and I'm going to be presenting our Precision Pulse trial. This is actually, I think now the third year of this study, and it's been quite interesting as we've been working with precision planters in our sort of small grains agriculture. It's certainly been a learning curve. We don't have everything figured out, but what I can say is that I do think that there's potential for the use of planters, or at least the adaptations of some of the features in a planter to help us have a more even crop, better seed to soil contact, better depth control, and ultimately the ability to do better agronomy, which will translate into yield and possibly some cost savings along the seed side of things. So as we worked with planters, we first started working in corn, and we quickly transitioned over to canola. There's been a lot of movement actually in the adoption of using planters in canola. I know the seed production acres here in southern Alberta are almost predominantly planted with a planter, and more of the commercial production across Alberta, farmers are looking to planters as a way of increasing their evenness in crop, being able to reduce seeding rates a little bit, and just manage that crop overall better. So it is really interesting. I do think we have a long ways to go to be able to adapt these planters so that they're really tuned into our zero tillage cropping systems, but I do think there's some potentials. I don't want to oversell them. They do come with costs and such, and we still are on the learning curve. But the next step for us after looking at canola was, if you're going to be investing in these planters, can we seed other crops with it? So we've got a precision durum trial. Behind me is our precision pulses trial. So it's a very simple trial. All we did was pick, sort of the major pulses, so lentils, chickpeas, soybeans, faba beans, probably something else that I'm forgetting, but we'll see as we walk through the plots. And we looked at a lower seeding rate. So the premise there is let's really kind of cut the recommended rate, and we just cut it by half, 50% lower rate versus what we'd say is a normal rate. One thing that we'll see in planters is that we do tend to have higher seedling emergence, higher seedling survival. So that does allow for cutting of rates. On the flip side, as we're moving to wider row spacing, and some of the commercial planters are on 15-inch row spacing, and we'll check some of that out in the fields. But we did this on a 12-inch row spacing, which is very narrow for a planter, and there's very few people have actually used a planter on a 12-inch row spacing. So that's unique to this trial. We felt that we wanted to sort of mimic what row spacing studies have shown in the past regarding row spacing for small grains, and that 12-inch row spacing is pretty ideal. Earlier on in showing off these trials, there were some farmers and agronomists that kind of liked the idea, and they went and tried this on field scale farms here in southern Alberta. They quickly found that on a 15-inch row spacing, that planters aren't quite designed in a way with the plates and the speed of the plates to hit the target rates that we're used to hitting with an air drill. So that's okay, but we just have to get comfortable with the fact that we may be able to get along with lower plant populations, that because the survival is higher, that your end target plant population is still pretty reasonable. But like I said, on 12-inch row spacings, there's a lot of visual differences. We compared it to our air drill on 12 inches as well. So like a half cut seeding rate and a normal seeding rate, just to kind of get a general idea of is there potential for the use of planters and pulses. So the plot right here is chickpeas, and chickpeas is a rather large seed. So you could see that potentially a big benefit for the use of planters because of that even distribution. This plot right here was actually chickpeas, but with our air drill. And you'll see that, sometimes we've got really big gaps in the planting. And over here, perhaps the depth was a little bit off. It actually was pretty dry when we planted. This was planted May 7th. So you're looking at depth control issues. You're looking at seed distribution issues. This isn't normally going to look this bad. Remember I said this is 50% seeding rate. But what it does is allows you to see what happens with that style of planter. When we move over to our precision planter, which is way down here. So now I've moved over to the chickpea plot, again with that low seeding rate, 50% seeding rate, but this time with the precision planter. You'll notice now when we look at the rows, we've got a plant that's evenly spaced and very little skips. So that is part of the mechanism of seed singulation, but there's also an advantage to that planter in how it contours to the soil with the parallel links. Now there are plant or air drills that are adopting this technology, and we're seeing more accurate planters. They're a little higher cost though, so it's hard to justify sometimes that added cost to have that more advanced seed depth control with the parallel linkage. But overall, you've got a pretty clean visual difference that we're doing a better job at both seed distribution, at depth control, and in the end, getting a more even crop. So that might play well into, say, staging of fungicides. Chickpeas, you have to spray a lot of fungicides for ascochyta blight. So whenever you have a more even crop, your agronomy decisions are a lot easier. When we move into cereals, for example, we're also studying, the fact that if we can have a very even crop for growth regulators, because staging on growth regulators is quite finicky. If you spray too early, too late, you can end up damaging the crop. So even crops, in the end up benefiting the overall yield. For this plot, we're going to look at soybeans, and I'm going to look at the high seeding rate, sort of the normal seeding rate. So soybeans aren't really a huge crop in southern Alberta, but they are starting to expand in acres. And traditionally, soybeans are often seeded with a row crop planter, so we know the benefits of a row crop planter with soybeans. But the dry bean acres here in southern Alberta are often used with a planter as well, but there's also a few people that are trying to solid seed them. So I mentioned before, when we're using a planter, I think there's still a need to have better equipment adaptation to deal with zero tillage. So down right in front of me, even though this is a planter, I do think it's overall a pretty even crop. I think when we get into the thicker residue, that's probably a bit of an issue in getting that plant into the ground properly. So our planter does have floating residue managers. It could be because we're at the beginning of the plot here. But those are some of those overall adaptations that I talk about. That residue management, and also being able to put the fertilizer down all in a one-pass seeding system. So some farmers have paired up planters with air carts, but traditionally, when you're using a row crop planter, the fertility is put down ahead of time, the majority of it, say nitrogen, and then usually it's just seed-placed phosphorus that goes down with the seed. So because of our efficiencies and scale of agriculture, we're going to need still a little bit more work on making sure that we can do a good job with zero tillage, that we can avoid hairpinning issues and things like that. So now we're at the soybeans with the air drill. And while I was sort of nitpicking the planter plot over there, you can still see that this one is not nearly as nice and even. So on this row over here, you can see that there's probably some hairpinning residue issues. Maybe the depth was affected, and we've got some plants that have struggled to get up. Some over here that are just popping out of the ground. Looks like something's been eating this one. But lower, maybe 2-leaf stage versus a much farther 5 or 6 leaf stage over here. So you get uneven germination. Then you have the uneven distribution as well, even though this is at the same seeding rate. So you can kind of see pretty clearly that in the right conditions, the planter can do a much more even job. I believe that will ultimately translate into a better crop and better yields. We just looked at the soybeans at the high seeding rate with the planter. This is actually soybeans with the low seeding rate at the planter. It actually looks better than the high seeding rate with the air drill. So even though this is half cut seeding rate, we've got a nice even stand. You can see that the plants are almost all at the same stage. We do have a few gaps because the rate's getting a little bit low, but overall, you know, just visually, I'd say that the low seeding rate here is going to at least match the high seeding rate with the air drill. Okay, now we're going to take a look at peas. These are both at the normal seeding rate for peas, but on my right is with the planter, and on my left is with the air drill. Both crops actually look pretty good. I wouldn't expect to see a significant yield difference. You can see a little bit of yellowing on this crop. It's probably a bit of Odyssey damage, given that we've had a number of days of sort of cool weather, but I think that'll grow through it all right. This row is nice and even. You know, I don't really see any gaps along it. It's going to grow up into a thick, healthy crop. And in all honesty, this one will too. But if you want to look closely, you'll have bunches of seed and then a gap and a gap and a gap. Whether that matters is still to be found out. And our yield data to date hasn't seen a significant difference in yield, but we'll look at that. But how does that distribution affect other things like agronomy? You know, it may help, it may not. So those are the differences that we're seeing visually at this time. But you know, the other thing you can see in this plot is you'll have some staging of peas that are here about like the 6th node, and then over here you've got some much smaller plants. So you've got that range of height. So will that translate into issues during harvest? You may have plants that are mature and ready to go, and yet other plants that are still trying to catch up. So again, that's another benefit of a nice even crop, is even maturity for harvest. Okay, for the last couple of plots now, we're going to look at faba beans. And faba beans are a very, very large seed and often difficult to get the target plant population that you're looking for out of an air drill. I'm actually pretty pleased with how well the planter does here. So this is the normal seeding rate. On the planter, I like how even the plants are, mostly at the same stage. We have a few gaps here and there, and that can happen too. You know, a little bounce on a planter, a seed can fall off of that vacuum. So that's another thing that I haven't mentioned, that, you know, learning to use a vacuum planter with all these pulses, we don't have it all figured out yet either. So, you know, having the right settings for all of these and having the right seed plate. So lentils is probably the trickiest one of all because of the weird shapes, but a faba bean is usually pretty easy to have set properly. But like I said, it's a big seed, so it's kind of a sensitive seed as well. One thing that I like about with the planter is that you're really taking care of that seed. So you're not going to crack it, you're not going to damage it before you even put it in the ground. That can happen with an air drill. With a big seed like that, as you're running it through rollers and through headers in an air drill. This is just a way that conserves that seed rather than wrecking it in the transition. To my left here is the same seeding rate with the air drill. You know, not bad, but we certainly are seeing some pretty big gaps. You know, a really big gap here. And then the other thing that you're seeing is big plants right next to little plants. So, you know, that's probably a depth control thing. It could be, you know, that may end up influencing your maturity levels at the end of the day, interplant competition, things like that. So, you know, we'll still have a good crop here, but I'm willing to bet we're going to have a better crop with the planter. So that's what I have for our plot tour this year, and the next step was we'll check some fields out. So now we're out in the field with Allison Davey, and thanks for letting us come out and see what's going on. Why don't you explain to me what crop we're standing in and what you've done?
So we're out here standing in a field of faba beans. In this field, we've split it a third, 2/3. This third that we're standing in was seeded with a monosem vacuum planter, and then the other 2/3 was seeded with a John Deere 455 disc drill. So.
And what led you to do this crazy research experiment?
So last year I attended one of the field schools at Farming Smarter, and I saw how they were doing some of their pulses with a vacuum planter. We have tried in the past with a disc drill to plant this crop with a lot of struggles, and I thought, well, you know, they've done it with a vacuum planter, I want to try that too. So I took the idea back to our farm, and I've got one guy here who's very enthusiastic to try my ideas. And so we have a 22-inch vacuum planter. And so we decided once we came out to the field that 22 inches was too wide. And so we double seeded. And so we've got 11-inch seeded faba beans out here.
So I assume you have a pretty accurate guidance system on your equipment to do that, or?
Yeah, we've got, this was seeded with a Fendt tractor, and it's got whatever the GPS tracking is on the fence. So
Great.
Yeah.
So are you happy with how it looks so far?
Yeah, really happy. The crop's looking great. It's loving the pivot going round and round. In this heat, the last week, it's really taken off. You can see there's a few flowers just starting out here now, so really happy with the crop.
One of the things that excites me with planters is just how pretty it is. And I know sometimes aesthetics don't matter. You know, back in the good old days when we used to till, that transition to zero tillage was tough because aesthetically it was ugly, but this is kind of the reverse. Now you've got this beautiful, nice, even crop. Do you think that's going to end up helping in the long run as far as your agronomic decisions and things like that?
I think so. I mean, I agree with you, want things to look nice, and when it came up, I mean, it was in beautiful straight rows, nice evenly spaced apart. The seeds were, you know, evenly set apart, and in my mind, you know, then you're really maximizing your seed bed when you can get those seeds properly placed within there, you know, proper distance apart and things like that. You don't have them competing on top of each other for nutrients and water. So you're just using, you know, the nutrients and water that's there better.
I'm curious, what kind of observations have you made so far between your trial, between the planter and the box drill? Do you know, you did plant counts? Are you noticing anything different disease-wise, anything like that?
When it came to plant counts, when you look at bigger areas, the plant stand was fairly similar. But here, you know, you've got your singulation, and to me, that's huge. Over there, you've got clumps of 4 seeds together, and then a big space. So in terms of singulation and overall stand, you know, I'm very, very happy with how it's turned out with the monosem. Yeah.
So if this turns out to say be, you know, what's the end result that you need to see to incorporate this practice on a larger scale on your farm?
So on our farm, if I would continue to use this, you know, it would be ease of planting. And so this year we were set up using just the small hoppers that come on the monosem. So I'd look at a central distribution system to make it easier for planting. And then basically, you know, if this third is equal to or better than the 455, then I would easily look at this system. It does take about twice the amount of time to plant the crop, so making sure you still have that planting window. But usually with faba beans, you know, it's before wheat, and so we do have a bigger window that we can plant in.
Great. So to be able to say do more acres with the planter, and I'm not honestly promoting planters, we just want to find a practice that helps improve your agronomic goals and efficiencies. So is it simply because of it's difficult to seed with the other ones, or are you actually hoping to get a yield advantage as well?
I'm hoping to get a yield advantage. Last year we didn't have a great plant stand, and so coming into it this year, I mean, already this crop is looking better than previous years, and so I think that also has to do with using the smaller, better shaped seed size with the monosem, because the monosem is also not going to work for every seed, but for this particular variety it did work well. And so, you know, as long as it's there, and yeah, like I've said with the singulation, if I can get that, then, you know, I'm happy to take the extra time and do this on our farm.
So what are some of the things that you struggled with when you first started out? Like, I know we've a lot of the time most folks have not used a monosem planter on faba beans and lentils and things like that. So you're kind of figuring out things as you go. Did you have that same experience?
Yes, on our farm we only use the monosem for seed canola, and we recently purchased it last year, so we're learning the machine to begin with, and then this year we extended it out to 16 rows. So again, that was a learning curve there, and then to throw an entirely different crop like faba beans in there where there's not a lot of information out there. You know, we asked Farming Smarter and we asked other people who have grown faba beans what their opinions were, but there's not a lot of research out there on especially field scale what this was going to look like. And after seeing what Farming Smarter was doing and seeing the plant stand, it got me excited, and I thought, well, let's try it. It's going to either work or not work.
So as a researcher, it's really kind of terrifying for us to see farmers adopting practices on a trial that we don't really have the results for yet.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I think it's kind of neat because by the time we're done our project, people are already tweaking it and actually adopting it. And a lot of times we get measured on do things get adopted. So I'm curious why you would have chosen to jump right at it, like right off the bat, and also why did you choose Fababeans first?
We looked at doing this just because last year we did struggle so much with getting the large Fababean seed into the soil, and so I knew right away if I was going to grow Fababeans again, then I was going to have to make some sort of planting change, whether that's a variety change or a planter change. And so this winter, when we were looking at our crop plan, then we decided no, we would go ahead and do it with the monosem. We had originally planned on doing the full circle with the vacuum planter, but then just due to weather constraints, we knew timing wise we had to get it in the soil. So yeah.
And then how about, why did you feel the risk of jumping in before we even done our study?
I saw your plant stand last year, and I'm not personally a huge fan of the air seeder, but just seeing the air seeder and the vacuum side by side, and that's, we didn't use an air seeder last year, but we had basically the same stand as what it was showing, and I just thought, like, look at that huge difference that the vacuum planter is doing. And on our farm, because we weren't growing a lot of other things that use a vacuum planter, I thought, this is another crop that we can put it to hopefully good use, so it's, being used for more than just the seed canola.
So we're using the seed canola on 22 inches then?
Yes.
Okay. So ideally, to do a crop like Fababeans, you'd like a more narrow row planter. What's your thoughts on where you would go? Would you pick 15s or 12s or?
Probably just to keep things simple on the farm, because of what we're doing right now with seed canola, I'd probably keep it on the 22-inch spacing, and then double seed like we did with this field here. And it's for practicality reasons. In a perfect world, if I can work with other companies and we can tighten up that spacing, and you can get ahead of that weed pressure, which is huge, then for sure I'd move to a tighter spacing. But right now, the reason we bought the vacuum planter was to satisfy seed canola companies, and so that's kind of, we're taking their lead on spacing.
So let's talk about the wind. And it's a beautiful windy day here. Luckily we're in some shelter, but we were discussing the issue that we're seeing with extreme wind and erosion. It seems to be a problem again.
Yes.
Did you till this field? And would you consider strip tillage, or what's your thoughts on how we can adapt these planters for a more zero tillage type approach in managing our lovely weather here in southern Alberta?
Yeah, so in this field we cultivated it once in the fall, and then once again this spring. And again, that goes off of our experience last year. We only cultivated it once before we seeded last year, and we thought that maybe that contributed to some of our plant stand issues. So this year when we were going into it, we thought, no, we need to do the double cultivation. And in this field in particular, it tends to hold the spring moisture quite well, and so I've left it in standing stubble in the past, and then we've had to wait to get into the field. So that was a deciding factor in this field. On a lot of our other fields, if we can direct seed, then we can, and that's definitely something, as a farm we're looking at more and more as we continue to upgrade our equipment. We're going to be looking for more direct seeding equipment. So
it's been my experience with the planters so far that they can be used as a direct seed implement, but they were designed for tillage originally, and I think there's still probably some adaptations that need to happen so that we can suit them into our conditions and our environment. So I'm not sure if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, again, I have limited experience when it comes to a vacuum planter, and in every instance that we've used it in, we've always used some sort of cultivation ahead of planting. And so, you know, as we gain more experience with it, or as, you know, there's modifications that can be made to the planter, then for sure I would keep that open as an option. So.
Well, thank you very much, Allison. I do have to tell you that there's no bigger compliment to us to see you out trying some of our new ideas, and I wish you the best of luck, and I hope that you have a bumper crop.
Thank you.
All right, now I'm out in a field of peas up by Scandia, which is just north of Vauxhall. And a local agronomist subscriber, Scott Gillespie with Plant Dig Soil, actually saw our plots in the first year of doing it and talked to one of his clients about trying peas with the monosem planter. So last year they did this for the first time, and they were pleased enough to do it 2 years running. So behind me has all been planted with the monosem planter on 15-inch row spacing. This is the interesting part, is that they had a target plant population of 7 seeds per square foot. And when they came out and did their plant counts, they got 9. So magically we have more plants than they actually put seeds down. But I guess there's probably some number crunching. But you can see we've got a nice, even, beautiful field of peas. You know, not the traditional way of doing it, but within 2 years of doing a project, farmers are seeing the plots, they're happy with how they look, and they're actually trying it out on their full field. So, you know, I don't think we complain too much for this irrigated pea field. It was seeded April 14th, and we're just coming into flower now. It's getting dry and hot. We've got lots of good heat units. And, you know, I have no doubt we're going to be pushing in that 80 to 100 bushel per acre pea crop. So that's pretty nice around here. Otherwise, the stand looks good. It's nice and even. One thing that I do notice, that even though we are about June 20th now, pretty much got full canopy closure, but having the 15-inch row spacing might actually be a good thing under irrigation, just to allow a little more airflow and help with the disease issues. So far they've just been watering it. They didn't fertilize when they were seeding it, just had a seed treatment and seed inoculant on the seed. Nice and simple, get her done, and it looks great. So I'm excited to see more people trying out different fields with the planter, and this is a perfect example of one right here. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Well, hello everybody. I'm now in the air-conditioned office, and I'm going to just show you briefly some of the results from these trials that you've seen in the field. So I've got our 2019 and our 2020 results. Of course, we don't have our 2021 results, but I'm sure hoping that we get some more rain so those pretty plots will turn into something. I know it's been pretty hot and windy, and we're desperately in need of some moisture. So fingers crossed. So I'm going to start out with our Chickpea Emergence, and in the blue bar is with the planter, and the red bar or pink bar is the air drill. We've got our error bars. Anything that actually has the star is statistically significant at the 95% confidence interval. So the ones that jump out right off the bat is that really 5 out of the 6 site years of data, there was a statistically significant response, meaning that in all of those cases, the planter did a better job with the chickpeas as far as emergence is concerned. This is pretty darn close here in Lethbridge 29. So we actually had a Lethbridge County, Lethbridge site here, and then in Medicine Hat were our 3 locations in 2019. In 2020, we've got the Lethbridge and Medicine Hat and our new Tabor location. These are all under dryland conditions. So, you know, at our biggest difference here, probably somewhere between a 50% emergence up to, you know, in that 85% range. So pretty big difference in emergence. And obviously chickpea is a really big seed. And I think, you know, we just do that much better of a job with the planter as far as depth control, getting it in there, I think the seed firmer plays a role in making sure that we have, you know, nice firm seed bed, good seed to soil contact, and enough moisture to get germination. So obviously these dryland conditions have been a little bit tough in the last number of years to get a good crop establishment. So we'll move on to the chickpea yield. So now you'll notice that there isn't as much significance, but still quite a few. So we've got 3 out of the 6 site years there was an increase in yield, although in 2019 our yields were quite low, so I would take that with a grain of salt. But in Medicine Hat we did see a yield advantage in 2019. In Lethbridge in 2020 we had a pretty darn big yield advantage, and we actually had reasonable yields last year thanks to the
the rains that we had. Medicine Hat was still dry and no statistical significant difference, but in Tabor, we did see a slight advantage with the planter on chickpeas. So on to faba bean. Now, faba bean, again, is a very large seed. 2019 was very dry, and we saw really huge differences in emergence. And I think that was, the difference between making it to moisture and not. So sometimes at the time of seeding, you've got that moisture layer that could be about 2 inches deep. And we've seen this quite often. This is if you're right on the line of moisture, sometimes you'll have uneven emergence. In this case, it was really significant. We're talking like 50% difference in emergence for our Lethbridge site, and pretty similar in our Lethbridge County site. Lethbridge and Lethbridge County. Medicine Hat was massively different. But then in 2020, we did have good spring moisture, and really only one site last year in Medicine Hat where we had a difference in emergence, and that's probably because it was drier, sandier soil out in the Medicine Hat area. So we'll move on to yield. And in this case, only 2 out of the 6 site years, we had a yield advantage. 2019 in Lethbridge County, Lethbridge itself was not any different. Medicine Hat was no different. 2020, very, very similar yields in our Lethbridge site. Medicine Hat, though, we did see a yield advantage, although our yields are quite low. These are kilograms per hectare, not bushels per acre, but I think most folks are getting used to that kgs per hectare. And our Tabor site, while we saw a numerical improvement, it was not statistically significant. So faba beans one to keep an eye on. We do see an improvement on emergence and uniformity. Does it always translate into yield? Well, so far it's 2 out of 6. We'll see how this 2021 year turns out. Lentils. So lentils, I've always found with the planter, a little bit tricky. The weird kind of cylindrical shape of the seed makes it difficult to, get your vacuum settings right so that you've got proper seed singulation. You've also, you're dealing with a smaller seed and a higher seeding rate. So don't often see visually a much, better improvement as far as establishment, although we did end up seeing 3 out of the 6 site years with an improvement in yield. Actually, no, I should take that back. We saw 2 years with an improvement, but in 2020, we actually saw the air drill had a better emergence. So that's why I'm saying this one, I think, is sort of up in the air whether there's really an advantage with the planter or not. For the most part, it's sort of hit or miss, and the data is a little bit confusing and hard to interpolate. When we move on to the yield, I think that sort of translates as well. We really only had 1 site year out of the 6 where there was a yield advantage. So I'm not quite as excited about the promise for using a planter with lentils, and I think our data is showing that as well. Okay, we'll move on to peas. So 3 out of our 6 site years that we have so far did show an improvement with the planter, and that makes sense to me. Our Lethbridge County site in 2019 showed about a 25% improvement. Our Medicine Hat location in 2019, again, a dry year, showed quite a significant improvement in emergence. So from under 50 upwards to about 80%. No difference Lethbridge in 2020. We did see an improvement in Medicine Hat, and we did also see a pretty significant numerical difference in Tabor, but I think the data was variable, so we didn't quite get that statistical significance. I'm sure if you looked at the p-value, it's close though. So, a little more promise for an advantage with peas. When we look at the yields, we have 2 site years out of the 6 that are showing statistical improvement in yield. That would have been Medicine Hat 2020, again, a low yielding environment, and Tabor in 2020, which is actually a pretty high yielding crop. So that's interesting. When we go back, Lethbridge 2019, no real difference. It looks like some variable data in Lethbridge County as well. Oh, sorry, this was Lethbridge County, Lethbridge. Really low drought-like year. So we have to sort of consider that as far as the validity of the data and basically a pretty much a crop failure type year. Medicine Hat, no statistical difference. Lethbridge in 2020, almost even with really high yields. So I think under those all optimum conditions, I think you'll always see that rain kind of solves a lot of problems, whether it's seed placement or fertilizer. So we had a good stand in both situations, and therefore no real difference in yield. Whereas Medicine Hat was still in sort of a drought type conditions, and we did see that improvement. So that's it for our data, and I'm going to open this up to questions. I'm here and look forward to talking to you. And we don't have it all solved, and this was sort of our first stab at playing around with pulse crops using a planter. It's been a lot of fun. I think there's more work to be done, and yeah, look forward to hearing from you. Take care.
Okay, thanks, Ken, for that presentation. It was fascinating. I loved the interview with Allison. It's too bad Scott Scar wasn't available. Next time, right, Scott?
It'll be hard to get them. They're camera shy.
Fair. That's fair. All right, I will open the floor to questions. So throw your questions at Ken or at Scott. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer questions about his grower as well, if you have any questions for him.
I can make a little comment too with the peas.
Certainly.
Okay. One the yield advantage was there, but one of the big advantages was that everything was even for timing, like for herbicide timing, desiccation timing, and and fungicide. And the combine operators said that it was just so nice. Like they just found the fields where they just went from one field to the next, and they had no, like it had been desiccated, but even then still it's like they didn't have like tough areas or hard areas. It just went, they were really fast. So that's one of the other advantages in having that really nice even stand.
Great. I have a question, I guess, for you guys then. So as far as adoption goes, it seems like the irrigated producers are perhaps in a better position to adopt new practices or technology or things like that. But there actually might be more of an advantage in this case for dryland guys to pick up the practice. Yes, no, comments on that?
Well, I think the irrigated folks are more likely to take the step in the first place because they have the planters for other uses, whether it's for sugar beets or dry beans or like Allison said, even seed canola now. But I have seen a lot of adoption of planters across the entire province that's been targeted for canola. So it's just sort of whether they're ready and willing to take the next step and try it out on a different crop.
Scott, do you see any significant barriers to adoption? I know you kind of had said last year that they struggled to hit the target plant population as far as the seeding rate goes. Have you seen anything else as far as that goes?
Yeah, well, that was the strange thing is that this year, I think we figured that the seed size must have been smaller than we had thought. But even then, I'm not sure why we got such good stands, but we'll take it. So I think really like that's the thing, like on irrigation and on a planter, you're on less amount of acres, so you have the time. But on dry land, it's going to be tough to make a planter work unless you're running you can have a crew that can keep it running 24 hours a day or longer shifts. I don't know, but maybe too as air drills, or there's kind of some hybrid systems where they're trying to bring some of the precision to the air drill. Maybe as those improve, then you can have the best of both worlds. It may not be precise like on dry land. It could give that extra precision and still be able to cover the acres that you need on dry land. So
there are companies also like Burgo who have sort of developed a quasi air drill planter type approach. So the precision placement they do have. I think their field scale studies have shown that they're not seeing a tremendous advantage with the placement of the seed as much as they are, sorry, not of the placement, of the singulation as much as they are with the seed placement. So I think companies are paying attention to the advantages that they have, and they're continually developing and upgrading their own equipment to sort of try to get the best of both worlds, where they can have the logistics, but also the benefits that the planters have to often. So that's why often I'll bring up the comment that there's still room for equipment adaptation, both on the planters, but also moving the air drills closer to, you know, that planter accuracy.
Okay, Steve, your camera's on. Does that mean you want to ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Absolutely.
Ken, I believe you're aware of the canola trial you've got just UC Research Farm. And it seems on corn stubble there was some, I guess, issues with emergence. And even now it's showing a few days lower, less maturity. So was any comments on that trial?
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up, Steve, because we haven't mentioned that. Well, we're not talking about canola on this topic, but Lewis Spartan, the field tested program, has taken our work in the small plot canola precision planter project and gone to the field with it. And the trial that Steve is mentioning was one where we actually had a company, and it was Great Plains, that decided to bring up a planter for us to try. So Lewis used that planter in a number of different field locations, compared to a John Deere air drill. And in this case, I think it's a good example of where not having experience with the equipment itself might have been a drawback. So one of the things that I noticed on that planter too was that it only had residue managers on half of the rows. So therefore, going through the corn stubble, you know, that's a pretty important thing to do, to move out of the way. A disc isn't going to do well going through a corn stover. So I think that's part of the issue. Any minute differences in depth control and being able to close wheels, you know, is going to be difficult. So, you know, it is possible, and you know, in any condition, one planter or air seeder is going to work better than the other. So I think that's the kind of the point of what we learn in doing these types of trials is it's pretty tough to compare apples to apples with two different implements at the same time. So that's part of the learning, and it is very possible in this case the planter will not perform to the same level as the air seeder, and then that happens. I think there are sometimes soil conditions suit one seeder versus another, and I think in this case actually a little bit of experience was lacking in not really having any experience with the Great Plains planter. But I'm sure that adaptations and changes could be made to you know, bring it up to snuff.
Okay, does anyone else have questions on planters? It could be on any crop, I guess. We've opened it up to canola, so we're also studying this on durum and hemp, as well as the pulses and corn and things like that. So if anyone has questions, Ken could perhaps talk a little bit about the other crops if there are any. No. Okay. All right. I will put up the QR code for those of you that are collecting your Certified Crop Advisor credits, and you can scan it or type it in the chat, and I will submit on your behalf.